right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the Main Street webinar on youth engagement in communities. Today, Allie Carson is going to be leading the webinar, and we're going to hear from two different communities. And just a reminder, I have started recording.
All right, well, thank you for joining us for our second session on youth engagement. We decided to do 2 sessions on it this month because it's such a prevalent issue and such a prevalent conversation in our state. And so today we have Mayor Lacey Hinkle of Cavalier, who is going to share a success story about bringing youth into community making decisions. And then we'll also have Kevin Lear from Rugby, who created a class at Rugby High School centered around community engagement for high schoolers, and he's found a lot of success on it. And so he's going to share with us a little bit about that as well.
All right, I'll talk about a little bit what we've got going on in Cavalier. It's called the Youth Leadership Group, and I originally got the idea from church council. We had a youth representative, and I saw what an impact she was making on our board and the ideas that she had and how successful they were. And so I thought, okay, how can we take this into the high school and get some of our youth playing an active role on the different groups and committees throughout the community. So I would say we started last fall, probably mid-fall, and I've got, I go into the high school once a month and I meet with this youth leadership group and we talk for about a half hour, but then this group of students goes out into the community and they go to different meetings. They go to library board, they go to chamber, retail board, rec board, and then they also come to council meetings, and their input has been so valuable. They're really learning a lot from our community and being on these committees, and I think these committees are also taking what the youth have to say and applying them to different aspects throughout the community. So it's been just really successful, and these kids have just completely amazed me at what great ideas they have and how smart they are. And I think that they are learning so much too, because they always come back, they always show up, and they always have questions every time. So it's really creating a sense of community, I think, for them. And it's also a way for us as community leaders to learn from them. So it's really been successful.
Lacey, can you share some ideas that the young people have come up with and shared during these meetings?
Oh, I got to think for a minute here. With the rec board, they're really the youth. There are youth in the community that don't have a place to go after school, and so they got active on the rec board to find a space for these kids to hang out. And the city just happened to own a building that had an extra room available, and so now the rec board this summer has been working on turning that room into more like a hangout for these kids. That it has like foosball or different games, couches, TV, just a place for these kids to go that they can hang out rather than roaming the streets of town and in the middle of winter with nowhere to go.
That sounds like a great idea, and that's something that we hear about a lot in our Main Street visits. Young people want a place to hang out. They want a place where they don't necessarily have to have direct parental supervision, but they want it to be safe, and they want to participate in activities like that.
Absolutely.
What's the process like of getting that organized?
I originally went to the superintendent and said, how can I make this work? And I dealt with the principal and I dealt with a couple of the different teachers, and the teachers really encouraged the students to show up that first time to hear what I had to say, because they were curious too. They weren't really sure what it would all entail. And so once I kind of gave them a brief explanation of what each committee does and what it would entail, then they kind of, each one would pick what suited their interest. And so now that person goes back to each meeting each month, and it's been consistent with what they're doing.
Yeah, I know we had talked a little bit on the phone about this, and I'm curious if you could share with us what it was like meeting with the students for the first time, because I feel like that is the biggest hurdle into getting these students involved is to get that first meeting. And it's just, I think it's a generational gap in communication, but can you share with us a little bit of what that was like and just kind of your philosophy around that?
Yeah, actually, it was very intimidating. um, I I brought the chamber director with me, honestly, more for support for myself because I didn't know what to expect either. But once I got over that first hurdle, and once I really talked to these kids and gave them the rundown of what I was looking for, got comfortable with them. Now each time we meet once a month, and it's so comfortable, and I feel like they're comfortable with me, and so they are opening up to me more and more all the time.
That's so good to hear. One thing that we talked about on our webinar earlier this week was the importance of building a trusting relationship with young people. It's not enough to just
Hmm.
say, hey, I want you to show up, I want you to volunteer, I want you to share your ideas, but they have to feel that they're going to be listened to and they have to really trust the adults that they're working with.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why I go and meet with them monthly. Also, it's just not enough to say, hey, so and so go to library board and so go to rec board. Like the follow up has really helped build those relationships.
Do you find that they're more comfortable to share their mind when you're meeting with them in their space? So you were saying you meet with them at the school, right?
Yes,
So do you think that's
yes,
different than
absolutely.
inviting them like, hey, will you come to the city council to share your ideas?
Yes, absolutely. When I go to the school, there was one time I was only supposed to be there for half an hour, and I ended up being there an hour because they were bombarding me with questions and information, and it was great. It was fabulous. But that's definitely their comfort zone because they have come to council meetings, and we've talked about this rec room where kids can hang out, and it's gotten brought up. And when I ask them questions at the council meetings, they're a lot more standoffish and a lot more timid, and so you definitely have to get more one-on-one with them in their environment.
That makes a lot of sense. Have any of them provided you with suggestions or feedback on ways that you can interact with them?
Um, I not necessarily. I think as long as we keep it casual and keep the conversation rolling, it just comes naturally.
Um,
Rather than trying to force it, and say, put boundaries or whatever. I mean, there obviously are boundaries, but you know, it just has to be more of a casual thing because when it's casual, then they're more comfortable and I'm more comfortable, and everything just flows better.
mhm. And maybe you said this already, but how did you recruit all of these students?
There was a lot of help from the teachers and the principal within the school. I don't think I would have had as many people show up if it weren't for a few key teachers that kind of pushed these students and said, hey, why don't you go to this? Why don't you go check out what this is all about? So, you definitely have to make those connections with the principal and the teachers in the school.
Was it easy to pitch the idea to the principals and teachers, or did they seem skeptical at all?
No, they were all on board. They were totally for it, and they've been very supportive. They've been great.
That is so good to hear. Schools are such an important partner in this.
Absolutely.
Um, so you're the mayor, and you're also really approachable and young, and I'm wondering if that helps you connect with some of the high school students.
I think so. I would say it's definitely an asset. But, like we discussed earlier, it doesn't have to be the mayor that does something like this. It can be your chamber director, your economic developer, a council member, somebody in the community that can kind of bridge that relationship. But it definitely doesn't have to be the mayor. It can be anybody that these students can relate to or get comfortable with.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions. Lacey, what
Sure.
would you say has been the biggest challenge that you've faced while engaging these young people in some of the decision-making processes at the community level?
Um, so there's a couple different challenges, I would say. These students are super, super busy. I mean, they are involved in absolutely everything. And so they can't always make it to the meetings. And so sometimes there's a little bit of consistency that gets lost because they can't make it to everything. And then also, when we are discussing at council meetings and you try to get their input, it's kind of the older generation, they're not as receptive to what the youth have to say. They don't see them as playing as big of a part in the community. So sometimes their opinions do get kind of lost in the shuffle, but I feel like the more you do it and the more you're consistent and the more you see things working out, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, that's something I was wondering about too. You have a lot of different boards and groups that you mentioned, and there's probably people in these groups that have been involved for years. And I was wondering how receptive they are to the idea of having young people come to the meeting, maybe even sit on the board, and then share some ideas that maybe they've tried before and haven't worked for various reasons. What's the process been like working with the adults who you're trying to work with?
When I first pitched this idea to the different committees, they were all really, really receptive and thought it was a great idea. And they have said, how great it's going so far. The actual committees have been great about it. I haven't really had any backlash from that. It's more sometimes the council.
Well, thanks again, Lacey. It's always good to hear a success
story like this. Yeah, thank you. Anytime. Yeah, anybody can feel free to reach out and I can talk about all of it. So.
And we might have time for a few questions at the end. So if you do think of some, hold them, and we might have some more time to chat about that as well. Next, we have Kevin Lear from Rugby.
This is Rugby, our hometown and the topic of our research over the last 3 months. The North Dakota history students at Rugby High School have taken on a project to highlight the history of our downtown community, its historical buildings, and the people who continue to work to keep our downtown alive and vibrant. As our project progressed, our direction and focus evolved to show more than just the history of the buildings. Through our investigation into the past, it was easy to see the way our Main Street affected the community and how that has changed over time. This research naturally brought us to what is taking place in downtown Rugby today. By analyzing those two pieces of information, we started to ask the question, what direction will we advance toward in the future? Our history is important to who we are as a community, and through this process, we have uncovered the interdependence between a vibrant downtown and a vibrant community.
The history of downtown Rugby starts with the beginning of Rugby itself. Established in 1886 as Rugby Junction, Rugby initially served as a stop on the Great Northern Railroad that branched to Botno and the Balta-Orne area. It wasn't until September 5, 1905 that Rugby officially became a city, after which Junction was removed from its name. Since the beginning, Rugby has seen numerous buildings, companies, tragedies, entrepreneurs, and celebrations. The vast majority of these have happened within the area that we know as Main Street.
Like most early settlements, the Main Street in Rugby was the social and economic hub for the community. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, Rugby had a number of different businesses and stores located along Main Street, just south of the railroad tracks. Taking a stroll on the boardwalk downtown, patrons would have had access to grocery, confectionery stores, clothing shops, diners, hotel lodging, mercantile stores, 2 different drug stores, a furniture store, lumber yard, multiple banking institutions, and a general store, along with the post office, train depot, and the courthouse. All of these would have been within a 3-block radius of the train depot, as the railroad served as the premier access point for travel and the shipment of goods to Rugby that supplied not only the community, but the surrounding farms and ranches as well.
By the turn of the century, Rugby was beginning to add businesses and buildings to the downtown area that would become some of the most memorable and prominent buildings to stand in the community. In 1903, O.T. Tusford built a two-story brick building located on the corner of Main and 2nd Street. This building originally served as a general store on the main floor, and the second floor was known as the Rugby Opera House. Some of Rugby's very first school graduation ceremonies were held there. Opera and other performance companies traveling by rail would stop in Rugby and perform in this location as well. In 1903, a barber shop was established in the basement, giving all 3 levels of the building an effective use for the community. Fortunately, this building is still standing in Rugby and is currently going through a major renovation to bring it back to life.
As equally as important as the Tufster building was the Creme and Hotel. Built in 1900 by J.C. Cremond, the hotel was one of the most recognizable buildings located on Main Street and just a stone's throw away from the depot. The 3-story building had rooms for both long-term and short-term stays, and a restaurant was located in the back. The Creme and Hotel was also one of the first buildings to have indoor plumbing. Through our interviews with local elderly residents, we discovered that the hotel would allow residents to come and shower during the cold winter months for a small fee, before indoor plumbing made its way into farmhouses in close proximity to the town.
In 1965, an arsonist set fire to the hotel, and a significant portion of the hotel was damaged before the fire department was able to contain the flames. The Creme and Hotel was closed after the fire and never reopened. It was eventually torn down, and the space became a parking lot between the railroad tracks and Chiropractic Associates.
In 1903, Jacobson's department store was rebuilt with a brick-and-mortar building. Although it is no longer standing, this building would be vital for businesses and services in the community for just over 50 years until it too burned down in 1954. The 3-story building would house the Jacobson department store, doctor and dentist offices, Bell telephone service, law and insurance offices, an abstract and real estate company, 6 apartments, as well as a grocery store and shoe store. Every level of the building would be occupied, and the loss of the building was coined the $1 Million Fire. We were able to talk with local residents that remember the fire and recall being able to see the smoke from as far away as 10 miles. Eventually, the Jacobsons would rebuild a 1-story building in the same location, but the visual change to the corner of Main and 2nd Street would be significant.
Directly on the north side of the Jacobson department store was the Grunwald Motor Company. Built in 1927 by Finger Grunwald, Grunwald Motors at one point was known as one of the best car dealerships between Minneapolis and Seattle. With the affordability and popularity of vehicles increasing, the Grunwald Motor Company would become a very significant spot in the landscape of downtown Rugby. New models of cars would be revealed as a social event that people would attend. The women's powder room was always well kept and accessible for shoppers to use as they patronized local business downtown. Local kids could be found trying to sneak into the basement to look at the new vehicles before the reveal, and a full-service shop was located in the back of the building. Luckily, the extra width of the common wall between this building and the Jacobson's department store kept the building from catching fire when the Jacobson store burned down. It currently has been renovated and still stands as a staple to the downtown business scene.
Throughout the early 1900s and into the 1930s, Rugby began to expand and see an increase in the need for financial institutions. Merchants Bank is the oldest banking institution in Pierce County and was established in 1897 by John A. Davis, Henry Erickson, and William D. McClintock. By 1904, the bank had built a new brick structure that featured the bank on the main level, a barbershop in the basement, and a physician's office upstairs. This showed how they utilized all levels available. First National Bank was built in 1901 and is one of the original 2-story brick buildings that still stands in downtown today.
As Rugby continued to evolve and grow, so too did the downtown area as electricity, sewer, water, and eventually paved roads made their way into our town. The original courthouse was picked up and moved east of its original location in order to make room for Main Street to expand south. This building would eventually be remodeled into apartments and currently stands across the street from the Memorial Hall in disrepair. Having multiple billiard halls and the Lyric Theater, the city could provide places for social events to take place, adding to the quality of life of Rugby residents. At one point, the Lyric showed 2 shows a night in order to keep up with the demand.
During the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Rugby would see 3 grocery stores, a local butcher shop, 3 hardware stores, a men's clothing store, a shoe store, and a number of different service-based companies, providing the things people of the community needed for a higher quality of life. JCPenney department store would come to town in 1963. The owner of the company visited his store in Rugby once, before it would eventually close in 1990.
As our project progressed, the importance of downtown has been an eye-opening and interesting piece of history that our class has tackled. In the process of our work, we were able to meet over 15 different business owners on Main Street and tour the buildings that we have learned so much about. Through these conversations and our on-site investigative work, a number of interesting facts came to light in understanding how our community and our downtown scene has moved forward. One of the biggest forces of change for our community was the 4-lane highway that now runs on the south edge of town. This major transportation route has given retail stores more traffic by being situated at highway frontage, and thus has pulled some businesses from downtown to these areas. Even though a number of businesses have chosen to locate out by the highway, the downtown businesses have continued to provide a strong base for our community, and they contribute a substantial portion of sale tax revenue to Rugby. Currently, there are 42 businesses in the downtown vicinity with 5 vacant storefronts. This is where our work on downtown revitalization came into play.
Researching the Main Street Initiative seemed to be a natural fit for our project, as we talked with local business owners about the reasons they choose to be located downtown. It also brought up ideas that they have to keep our Main Street alive and vibrant. With this work, our class was able to see how some communities are putting a focus back into their downtown by utilizing space, structures, and history to bring back a vibrant community core. Working with the Kilbourne Group out of Fargo, we were able to look at how this company has approached the challenge of revitalizing downtown Fargo with the goal of creating a smart, vibrant downtown that adds to the health and quality of life for the residents of Fargo. Mixed-use density for the area was a common theme that we continued to come across in our research, and it became clear to see that this is something our Main Street showed in its early years. By coming to one area, residents are able to take advantage of the multiple establishments that have been integrated into the downtown scene within a walkable distance. The businesses fed off the traffic generated, and this was something that was brought to our attention multiple times from local business owners in downtown Rugby. Although the scale is much different between Rugby and Fargo, the idea is the same. Having entrepreneurs willing to establish a business in downtown is something our community should be proud to support. And luckily for Rugby, there are people who are finding opportunities to establish new businesses in some of Rugby's oldest buildings today.
Through all of this, there's something that we have found to be far greater than the buildings and location that make a community what it is, and that is the people. Working with business owners, city officials, and local residents, we have seen a strong effort to continue moving our town into the future, and the biggest question that we have yet to answer is simple: where will our future take us? Only through collaboration, community building, and an entrepreneurial spirit will we find out where we go from here. Rugby has a unique and storied history to tell, and we hope that by bringing some of it to light allows us all to take pride in the community that we call home.
I can kind of start by talking about the documentary. That got us going kind of in this direction of community building, I guess. That was a project that we did in North Dakota Studies, and what ended up happening was I just was looking for something really neat to do, kind of a project-based learning experience for students. And it was kind of in perfect unison. We were looking at, well, the history of our town is pretty neat, and we would really like to kind of highlight that. But then, what's something that we can tie it in for the relevancy of, why we should learn about the history of our town. And that was at the time, Governor Burgum was really, really launching the Main Street Initiative, and I was reading more and more into that. And so it just kind of made a perfect connection there for students. So we went off on this journey for an entire semester of putting together this big historical research project tied into the Main Street Initiative, and we came up with the documentary at the end. And we actually ended up doing a community forum where we showed the documentary, and we had students talk about kind of reflecting on the whole process. Lieutenant Governor Sanford was able to come and speak about the Main Street Initiative to people in our community. And when I kind of sat back after that was all done, took a big look, and I was like, holy smokes, this is we got something really good here, and we should continue to try to pursue this. So that's when I got on the horn with our administration and really started looking at, what can we actually do to get things kind of going in the direction of, could this potentially be a class? So anyways, we came up with the concept. I approached our administration and I said, I'd really like to teach a community building class. And this is what I'm thinking. And the first thing my principal said was, I think it's an awesome idea, but, what are you going to do for a curriculum? And I said, well, there's nothing that I know of that is an actual high school class curriculum that we can get our hands on. So here's what I've been reading a lot about, and this is what I could build a curriculum off of. And so once I showed them kind of how I could build a curriculum on, the basics of what it takes to be an active community member and to build, vibrant, healthy community, they kind of were like, okay, yeah, let's go for it. So I went through the process of getting that all set up, getting our standards aligned and that kind of stuff. And then we launched that class last year. And I had 9 students sign up for it as an elective. And then we just took off from there. So the document that you're seeing in front of you on your computer screen is actually something that we created as a class, as a final project. So we got the invitation to go down and meet Governor Burgum, and so we wanted to have something to actually give him that was student-generated work to show, like, this is what we've been learning about. And so what I had the students do is put together an executive summary, basically, of the different things. So the first part kind of lays out what our big learning targets were. So I had all this information already kind of built and was guiding our work in the class. And then we went through a lot of project-based learning stuff. I would say about 90% of this class was project-based learning that was directly tied to our community. And then we used a lot of examples. And the big thing I would say in doing this was, for me, it was always, how do we extend ourselves outside of the classroom? We have 45-minute classes. So, once every day we're meeting for 45 minutes. How can we maximize that time to really try to get some impact? So that we can start to see where are areas that we could do things a little differently in rugby, and that they could, come up with ideas to present to the people that we need to get approval from in rugby in order for this to kind of work. And so I use Google Maps a lot to be able to virtually go out of the class, look at examples of different communities and design, all that kind of stuff. So those 4 learning targets, I would say we very much engaged really hard in those 4 learning targets, and everything kind of revolved around that. Our primary resource that we used for the class was a free ebook that I got from Strong Towns. That's just on their website, and I got turned on to Strong Towns by one of the by a person who works at Kilburn Group in Fargo, actually, Adrienne Olson. She told me, you should really check this out if you're interested in this. And once I got on the Strong Towns, I really started getting through a lot of information that was applicable to how we can maybe use it as a curriculum, or at least a baseline for the curriculum. The Main Street Initiative and the work that everybody from the North Dakota side has put into that, a lot of that information we pulled and we used in the class as well. So when you kind of keep going through this document, what you'll see is basically how it lays out the entire year. So I had the 9 kids, so I told them we're going to come up with 9 specific things that we felt like we really, just kind of knocked it out of the park on in terms of learning about, and then actually coming up with projects to implement in our community. And I would say for the most part, after we did that documentary, it was kind of interesting on just how much people in our community opened up to the idea of students being engaged with what's going on in our town. And I think it was a really great segue, that, looking back, it would probably happen in the right sequence of events, trying to plan it forward. I don't know if I would have thought we would end up where we were at, but what's been really cool is we ended up with, our new kind of leadership that came in that election cycle in rugby, our new JDA director. We got a new chamber director. These are all fairly new people. all with a lot of excitement about what rugby can potentially, do and change and make better for our community. And then we had this group of students coming in at the same time that were really excited about doing something to help out. So it was kind of a perfect storm getting us through. And then I think that whole process we did with the documentary gave some legitimacy to what the school's role could be in this whole process as well. So the 4 main topics that we covered were, obviously understanding what the Main Street Initiative is. Incrementalism, I think, is a really awesome topic to cover with students because it's very easy to understand, but it's so applicable in so many different areas of community building, or just even in their own personal life. I had kids, when they would write reflections or papers for me, they'd talk about, even just making small changes in their own life have made a difference. So there's a very broad scope there with incrementalism that you can hammer a lot of things with, which is really cool. Community beautification was really neat, and how design can add to, the appeal of your community. So we did a lot of things with that. And then community activation, which is, we have a generation, I think, of young parents or young professionals that are coming into the workforce that are looking for things to do, not necessarily that it's just what's accessible in terms of shopping or places to eat, but like what are some activating types of events that are happening that people can go and have that sense of community and camaraderie. And so we talked a lot about community activation and what that can do with, driving sales tax and pulling people from outside the community to our community, and that was a really great discussion too. So those were kind of some of the main topics, I would say, that we covered. And then the next list is the project-based learning experiences. So if you go through this document that you have, you'll see each kid would put together basically like, here's this summary of what this looked like in our classroom. So we did a community comparison virtual tour, which was, here's what Rugby looks like, and then here's another town of comparable size in North Dakota, and what do they have that Rugby doesn't have, or what does Rugby have that they don't have? And so we did a comparison there. And then they had to go outside of North Dakota to look for a comparable community. Maybe, a lot of kids found, like in Colorado or Minnesota, Montana, comparable sized communities and what those might look like. And then again, what do they have, what do they not have? And then we went kind of North America in terms of like, okay, let's go to Canada or, another country, maybe even over in Europe if you wanted to go that far. A couple kids wanted to, just to get an idea of, what are some different things that open you up. Because, and I think in a lot of small towns in North Dakota, when you look at like the core of that community, a lot of times it's people who have been in that community and more times than not, like almost their whole life. They went to school there, they maybe left for a little bit and came back, and now they raised a family and they're there. But when you get those experiences outside of a community, or you see what other communities have done, and then you can maybe build off that for sparking new ideas to do something different. And it might be as simple as, putting new light poles on Main Street just because it would look a little bit better and have a little more functionality or something like that. So we did a community forum. That was when the Department of Commerce, Emily was up. That's the first time I got to meet Emily, actually, was up in Rugby for that. And we had 2 students who were on the panel in our local theater who were talking about different things. And to be honest, we were, about a month and a half or 2 months almost into school there, and we had covered a lot of stuff in class for kind of the basics of what we were going to be doing. And I was pretty proud of our two boys that were up on the panel, but our whole class in general, because again, that was where we're out in the community, and those kids started talking and people were listening to them. And that was the number one thing that we got out of that when we came back was, they felt like people were actually listening to what they had to say. And I think in order for something like this to be successful with engaging kids, like we have to be able to get kids on a playing field where people are listening to them with authenticity, not just, oh, that's a great idea, and then blowing them off. Because we've had a little bit of that in terms of some people like, oh, that's just another idea, and, they blow it off. And then that really messes with kind of how kids think a little bit in terms of what they're doing. Because believe it or not, they're in a pretty instant gratification mindset a little bit right now, this high school group. And so it's not always instant, but cutting them down quickly can be a pretty easy way to stifle any kind of momentum that we have going. So we went through the community community forum. And then what we did, and for me as the instructor, I'm always looking for ways like, okay, how do we take what we're doing now and how do we maybe continue to build on it? So we're constantly looking for momentum to keep the class rolling in a good direction. So from the community forum, we went into we went into kind of assessing what did everybody say in that forum based on the community. What were some themes that we saw that we didn't have answers to, and then how could we get those answers? And so we came up with a couple things that were pretty evident that we couldn't really answer as a community in that forum. And then I worked with the kids to show them, this is how we can build a legitimate survey. Well, let's survey the community. Let's see, if we can shoot for like 15% of our community to answer this survey, and then let's see if we can't start actually getting some concrete data to maybe give our community, leaders some ammunition to make some decisions. And so that was a really great project because, survey development is an interesting topic in itself. And then for them to be able to actually build the survey, initiate the process of launching that, watch the data roll in live time, and then analyze all that data and break it down into a full-fledged report. And then we did that. We broke it down into an actual presentation that those kids were able to give in terms of the themes of the survey, I think we ended up with about 11% of our community surveyed with legitimate answers. So they did a really nice job, and we were able to gather some really good information for our community to use, and then we sent that off to our mayor. So that was a really good in terms of an impact for real data. That was another aspect that kind of was a neat thing. From there, let me see where my notes are here. We moved on to probably, in my opinion, the coolest project that we did. So on the document, it says putting Rugby on the map. It's our Google Maps project. This was 100% student driven. So one of my challenges to our class as we were going through the year was at some point, I want to be able to pull off a project that I can tell people this was a student generated idea. And at this point in the year, we had been out, we'd been doing some really good stuff in the community. We'd kind of been, people knew what we were doing. But what I was trying to get across to our students was that incremental approach, which was we don't always have to be out in front of everybody doing something, and we don't always have to be asking for anything or trying to say, well, what if we did this or this or this? Sometimes people can just get tired of hearing like a lot of ideas and no action. I was like, well, how about we do something, if we can come up with an idea that's all action and nobody even really knows what's happening, but it's going to make a concrete difference. And one of my seniors came up with the idea of, well, what if we went on to Google Maps and we updated the entire Google Maps for Rugby with all accurate information for our businesses? So, what times are they open and the actual address. So that way when you put it in to your phone, you're going to get taken right to the front door of that business, because we had a lot of things on Google Maps which were incorrect, gone, placed. I mean, we had businesses that were in the middle of a field, like it was just highly inaccurate. So that's where we embarked on that Google Maps project. And that student, Ian, took the lead on that. And he just knocked it out of the park. So him and I worked together outside of class to be able to get everything in the right, kind of the right approach on how we were going to train the rest of the kids. And then we came into class and he kind of took over, and then we got everybody trained into Google Maps editing. We built spreadsheets. We analyzed every single business that we had in Rugby. For 2 weeks, I actually had the minibus reserved, and for 40 minutes every day, we'd get in the minibus and we drove every single street in Rugby, making sure we had every single business right. And then, got that completely finished up. And that was something that benefited every business in our town. And, most businesses in our town really didn't even have any idea we were doing it. And then all of a sudden you'd start to hear people like, yeah, my stuff's all updated on Google Maps. Or like our JDA director, she's like, I went on there and I've been trying to figure out how to get our actual office in the right location. And all of a sudden it was changed. And I was like, yeah, our class did that. So that was pretty cool for the kids to get that kind of impact on a project. And it's not always applicable to big cities, but I think in your small towns, it's super easy to do. And it got to the point where Google was so familiar with the 9 accounts that were doing the updating for Rugby, like you actually build credibility with Google as you go along and they approve these things. And we were getting it to like where we would make an edit and we'd be like maybe the next day, within 24 hours, the edit would be approved, to where we were making edits by the end, and within 5 or 10 minutes, Google was already approving it. So those kids were actually building up levels of credibility within Google, which was pretty cool. So that was good. One of the other big projects that we did to get out in the community and help our JDA was our downtown tour of potential. So our JDA director, she had spent a lot of time kind of talking with our class about different things, and then she came up with the idea of highlighting all the empty space that's available in our downtown, like for, business activation or residential build outs, anything like that. And then she asked our class to tie in with her to help with that. So the kids did historical breakdowns of every building that was going to be featured on the tour. And so they did, this is what's been in these buildings, to kind of spark ideas of what's come before. Maybe there's some of these things that could come again. We had some huge themes come out of this, where the kids took groups around to all the buildings, and then we had people in the buildings explaining, the property owners were explaining, what the building is currently being used for, or what space is available. And then the students had flyers put up in each building of all the different things that had been in there before, so people could see what the history of each building was. And then we had big marker tabs set up so people could write down, like, these are ideas that would be really neat maybe for our community to have in these buildings. And so we got a lot of themes out of there of, can we recruit somebody to Rugby to put up a bakery or a deli shop or another restaurant or a community center or something like that. And so that was a really successful thing. And that was all. It's amazing to see how much energy and excitement kids have when they're fully invested into a project that's having concrete results in the community. And this was another perfect example of something that had a concrete result, because they ended up with about 60 people that toured through these buildings, and most from Rugby, but there were people from outside of Rugby after they did the advertising and stuff to get people to come check it out, and that was a pretty big success too. So from there, I think, what do we have left? So yeah, these are just pictures of like the map that the kids did on Google Maps of where everybody was supposed to go, so nobody got lost, and that kind of stuff. And that was just a walking tour, so kind of neat. And that kind of showcased just how easy it is in terms of walkability to get from different buildings if those buildings are activated. So the kids got to talk a lot about like walk score and pedestrian infrastructure design and that kind of thing too. So yeah, this is what they handed this to Governor Burgum, and Governor Burgum flipped through it, and then he just started grilling them on questions about what are you doing, and have you learned about this and this, and that was a really kind of a humbling experience, because the kids, I thought, did a fantastic job of holding their own of what they've learned, and then from there we really got a great feedback, I guess. So it's been a pretty cool journey, so I'll leave it there.
Wow, thank you, Kevin. It has been a busy year for you, and we're super excited to hear that you're going to be teaching this class again in the next school year. Does anybody have a question for Kevin before we launch into our list of questions that we just jotted down?
Okay, I'm with the Pierce County Tribune in Rugby, and what are some ideas for the future to keep the students engaged that you might have?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're looking at, I'm working with one of our business teachers. She is kind of spearheads the entrepreneurial class in our high school, and the internship program, or office co-op program we call it. One of the things that her and I were talking about actually just this week was what I really want to see in our community is some entrepreneurial training, and that doesn't have to necessarily be just for high school kids. That could be for anybody in our community who wants to learn more about what it takes to start a business or the struggles of starting a business. And so basically the concept would be kind of modeling after the 1 million cups concept that Fargo and Bismarck does, but have it something that is generated by students from the high school. So maybe once a quarter, or maybe twice a school year, or something like that in a small way, but do it in a neutral location somewhere in town. Bring in a couple people from the community who are entrepreneurs who have been successful, and get kids involved in that process of what it looks like when you network with people, when you're talking about things that are applicable from what you're learning in school to how it looks in real life, and starting to bridge the dialogue between kids that are coming out of high school or even in their last years of high school and our community itself, and where there might be some opportunity for kids to look at, do they want to try to start a business? Do they want to, look at what they could do for another business in terms of coming on with some creative ideas to help another business grow, something like that. That's kind of some stuff that we're looking at there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kevin, I have a question for you based on our work with the Main Street Student Advisory Committee. So we really enjoyed working with this group of students, and one of our main takeaways was that the students in these rural communities are way more aware of some of the aesthetic factors of downtowns than us adults really give them credit for or are aware of ourselves. For example, they're super aware of dilapidated buildings, and this is something that they're really concerned about. Is that something that you found too while working with these students?
Yeah, 100%. It was amazing. Like that community virtual tour that we did to kick off the year, that was the very first thing I had them do. And it was within minutes you had kids who were already picking out those, and I use street lights, for example, because it's such an easy thing to see. But if you never see any other community differently, you never really notice it. They're like, Carrington has such nice streetlights, or Harvey has such nice streetlights. Why can't we? Our streetlights are leaning. It's yeah, it's such a simple thing, but it adds to the appeal of what your downtown looks like. The building thing for sure. And what was a little different too is we had kids who actually got to kind of have a front row seat in terms of how some of the buildings have been renovated in downtown. So that was really neat for them. But yeah, these concepts are not hard for kids to pick up, and I think that's one of the things. I don't really know a whole heck of a lot about community building or infrastructure design, so I've been learning like crazy and all the material I can get my hands on, so that I can help kids along the way. And what I tell them is, we're going to learn this together, but as soon as they catch on to those concepts, it's they can apply it really fast. I mean, they process this really quick.
That's so inspiring to hear. So for communities that might be interested in engaging with youth in a similar way, I asked Lacey for some of her takeaways, I guess, and one was the importance of building a trusting relationship. And then we also decided that meeting them where they're at in their space, so in the school, is something that can also help with that. Do you have any other takeaways or suggestions to share for how other community leaders can work with youth?
Yeah, I would highly recommend that you look at your school and see if you have a business teacher or a social studies teacher or somebody who could potentially, take the reins and go with something like this. And I don't think it would necessarily have to be an entire class. I decided I just wanted to teach a class specific to this, but I think you could do a condensed unit within a class on something like this, or you could even do a Genius Hour project where you're specifically targeting one thing in your community that you want to address. But the reason I say that is because kids are incredibly busy with everything and anything that they want to be engaged with. And if you can get them in school where you have that built time to work with them every day and you can get the consistency, it's a lot easier to introduce this stuff and then get them to actually engage with it to the point where, you have to almost get the inertia going. You got to get kids going on the topic, and then once they see the momentum and they start picking it up, then they'll take it and go. I had a lot of kids do a lot of stuff outside of school with this class because they wanted to, and that's what you got to try to get them to that point where they want to do it. But having that built-in time in school has really allowed me to get them there, for sure.